Urgently, the sky is being locked down, Shaheds have been sentenced, Ukraine is receiving deadly systems. Sweden and Denmark have thrown in billions to wipe out Russian drones. A secret air defense battalion radar and the countdown to the first launches. The Kremlin is in panic, but this is only the beginning. The occupiers' Starlink is going down en masse, the enemy is going blind and losing control. Elon Musk has hit the Kremlin hard and help is arriving faster than the enemy can blink. Fedorov has announced something incredible. This is the main trump card in the hands of the armed forces. All this and more coming up next. Watch until the end. Ukraine Today welcomes you. Renata Aslanova and recent events. The end of the martyrs. Ukraine receives super powerful anti-aircraft guns, Trident MK2. The sky will turn into an impregnable fortress. The countdown has begun. The first Trident MK2 drone killers will soon enter the fray. Sweden and Denmark have dealt a crushing financial blow to the Kremlin's ambitions, pooling billions to completely clear the Ukrainian skies. A secret configuration with the Swedish SAB Miracle radar will make Shahed's easy prey. Stockholm has already invested $235 million in the project. And Denmark added its own millions, calling on the whole world to finish off the Russian threat. This is a high-tech trap for Putin's drones. Denmark put another 480 million kroner on the table. This money is enough to arm an entire battalion to the teeth. Now, every launch of a Russian drone will become a one-way ticket for the occupiers, while Ukrainian soldiers will gain absolute superiority. The Trident MK2 is a modern anti-aircraft system. At its core is a 40mm cannon capable of hitting aerial targets at a distance of up to 12 kilometers with a high rate of fire, 200 to 300 rounds per minute. Production of the Trident MK2 is running at full capacity. Some of the systems are already being assembled specifically for the Ukrainian armed forces. It was previously reported that manufacturing a single Trident MK2 takes about 15 months. This is the most cost-effective and efficient solution, which will turn Russia's expensive attacks into a pointless waste of resources and a humiliating failure. Problems hit the Russians all at once, like an avalanche. Russian war correspondents are howling in despair and the occupiers are losing communication en masse. The Ukrainian Ministry of Defense and Elon Musk have dealt a blow to the Kremlin's back. SpaceX has begun a total purge of the network. Shahed confirmed that the Ukrainian armed forces are regaining dominance while the enemy is going blind.
The enemy reports a mass shutdown of Starlink in Russian units on the front line. If this is really the case, then the Ukrainian army will regain its communications advantage, while the enemy will face a number of problems managing their troops at the tactical level. At the
same time, he reminded everyone that all Ukrainian users need to register their Starlink devices in the Delta system. They will be added to SpaceX's whitelist. The Ministry of Defense urges Ukrainian commanders to monitor this to ensure uninterrupted and stable communications on the front line. A Ukrainian serviceman with the call sign Osman noted that the occupiers sawed off the branch they were sitting on themselves when they started using the terminals on drones to kill civilians. Earlier, Elon Musk responded and stated that restrictions for Starlink began to take effect on February 1st. At the same time, Russian propagandists started whining about the new restrictions. It turned out that Starlink now automatically shuts off if the terminal carrier's speed exceeds 75 to 90 kilometers per hour.
Starlink, it seems, is done for. Ours have stopped working.
A post for those who believe that Elon Musk was on our side and falling for his occasional provocations mistook wishful thinking for reality. When will you finally take off your rose-colored glasses and stop believing in the peaceful intentions of the Trumps, the Musks, and others like them?
Meanwhile, Fedorov is ramping up the arms machine for Ukraine to the maximum. A tough pact with NATO, the priorities are set, Putin should get ready. Ukraine and the alliance have reached the peak of cooperation. Ukraine's Minister of Defense, Mikhailo Fedorov, and top NATO generals have signed a death sentence for Russian aviation. We're talking about total domination. Patriots, F-16S, and HIMARS are getting a new boost. And the unique combat experience in the south will set the trend in NATO headquarters.
The parties have agreed on the key priorities for cooperation. Strengthening air defense. Development of Patriot, F-16 and HIMARS systems, as well as joint work on technological superiority. Ukraine is sharing its unique combat experience, real battlefield data, and technological solutions that are already in use with its partners.
A separate track of cooperation is the coordination of the Ramstein format. Ukraine, Britain, and Germany are taking control of arms supplies. Now decisions will be made lightning fast. Coordination has reached such a level that aid will reach the front faster than the enemy can even find out about it. France is also expected to provide assistance to Ukraine. Several aircraft, missiles for air defense systems, and aerial bombs. This became known after a conversation between Zelensky and Macron. Berlin has also made up its mind and is once again opening its weapons arsenals to Kyiv. A shocking piece of news. New IRIS-T systems from Germany will soon arrive in Ukraine.
We have actually already delivered 9 Iris-T systems, as far as I know. And in the near future, more new Iris-T systems are expected to be delivered.
Breaking U.S. news. Tomahawks aimed at Moscow. The U.S. prepares a devastating strike on the Kremlin. Lindsey Graham demands Kyiv receive the ultimate trump card. The time for persuasion is over. Now is the time for brute force. Will the White House dare to take this fatal step for Moscow? Watch.
American Republican Senator Lindsey Graham has called on Trump to finally send Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine.
After all, following last night's massive attack, I urge President Trump to begin the process of supplying Ukraine Tomahawk missiles, which would be a game changer militarily. In the coming days and weeks, we must increase the pressure on Putin. Any negotiations that are seen as excessively rewarding aggression will lead to disasters around the world.
Well, obviously this is being coordinated directly by the White House, but the well-known Lindsey Graham published a major post with an appeal to provide Tomahawks to Ukraine. This doesn't mean that Tomahawks will actually be supplied, but it's one way to show that Washington is dissatisfied.
Of course, from across the border, they're constantly crowing that Tomahawks will lead to a new escalation, and so on.
Can Tomahawks cause us damage? They can. We will shoot them down, we will improve our system.
Will this harm our own interests? Relations, in which there seemed to be some light at the end of the tunnel? Of course it will. Well, how could it be otherwise? It's impossible to use Tomahawks without the direct involvement of American military personnel. This would mean an absolutely new, qualitatively new stage of escalation, including in relations between Russia and the United States.
I don't think we're already dealing with the finalized decision. The Americans don't supply Tomahawks to just anyone. And if they believe that Ukraine is a responsible state that will use them responsibly, that would be surprising to me.
Naturally, all of this is empty talk, and American missiles really could help finally push Putin toward peace.
They have never taken the issue seriously, of ensuring peace or taking any steps toward it. It was all insincere, it was all just for show. But if Trump had actually provided missiles in significant numbers, the same Tomahawks, just like some Europeans did, and if they had struck Moscow even once with them, I assure you, the conversation would be completely different.
At the same time, Trump himself keeps wavering, from statements that he will soon provide Tomahawks to a categorical no.
Yes, I've almost made up my mind if you think about it. I want to know what they're going to do with them, where they'll send them. I think I'll have to ask that question. We'll see, but at the same time, I don't want an escalation. We need Tomahawks for the United States as well. We have a lot of them, but we need them. I mean, we can't deplete the stockpiles for our own country. They're very powerful, important, they're very good, but they're also important for us. But
perhaps, for example, a strike on Ukrainian energy infrastructure and abnormal cold could influence the President of the United States, right at the moment when he was announcing agreements with Putin.
But how did he get set up? How did Putin set him up? He makes a statement, and at that very moment, missiles strike. It's a complete setup. But he's the president of the greatest country in the world, says he reached an agreement, and then he gets literally spat in the face. He looks like a total loser right now. When he makes such statements, this is how they treat him. They spit on him. That's why there's hope that the next move will be directed specifically against the Russians.
Be that as it may, according to experts, previously even threats, not the actual fact of deliveries, had an effect on Russia.
As last year's experience showed, as soon as the United States even mentioned Tomahawk missiles, Putin immediately began to demonstrate the highest level of constructiveness, or rather, constructive behavior, and tried in every possible way to, demonstrate that he wants peace. If the United States had clearly stated that, in the event Russia destroyed Ukraine's energy infrastructure, Ukraine would receive MK2 missiles, I guarantee that nothing like what is happening now would have occurred.
Whether it will work this time is still unclear. But it is quite likely that threats, as was the case with sanctions against Lukoil and Russian oil, could very soon turn into action.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
Breaking news, the West has become a wall behind Ukraine. Europe and America are throwing all their resources into supporting Kyiv. The West has gone all in. The latest aid packages are not just numbers, they are a death sentence for the military machine of the aggressor. Which countries are fully engaged and which steps are changing? A turning point in history? Watch this.
The world is on Ukraine's side. All civilized countries support Ukraine and in a wide variety of ways. This includes military aid, and partners are also helping on the political stage. And lately, against the backdrop of massive Russian attacks on Ukrainian infrastructure, energy support for Ukraine has been increasing. Let's go through the countries and take a closer look at who is helping Ukraine and how. Let's start with Germany. At the end of last year, a very important decision was made there to support Ukraine. Berlin is allocating an additional 3 billion euros in aid for 2026, bringing the total amount of German support for Kyiv to 11.5 billion euros. The additional funds are intended for artillery, drones, and armored vehicles, as well as for replacing 2 Patriot air defense systems.
Here, there is a prevailing awareness of the danger that is inevitable for the future relationship between Europe and the Russian Federation. In other words, most of them understand the full extent of the danger and are trying, with the tools they have, to delay this moment as much as possible, or to protect themselves at Ukraine's expense, that is, by supporting Ukraine.
In just a few days, Germany will increase its emergency energy support for Ukraine this winter to 120 million euros. Germany is one of Ukraine's largest partners. This winter, 60 million euros have already been allocated for humanitarian needs. France, for its part, is increasing pressure on Russia and imposing new sanctions. The country is working on introducing new sanctions at the EU level and will continue measures to counter the activities of the Shadow Fleet. This was announced by French President Emmanuel Macron. Next, let's talk about a country that since the beginning of the full-scale war has been one of the leaders in supporting Ukraine. That country is the United Kingdom. Before this winter, the country supplied Ukraine with Storm Shadow cruise missiles. However, the exact number of these weapons received by Kyiv remains classified. In addition, Britain has spent $1.3 billion on arms and military aid to Ukraine, which should fully cover the income from frozen Russian assets. Ukraine has received hundreds of thousands of artillery shells, hundreds of missiles, air defense systems, spare parts, and new repair contracts. Britain is also keeping pace when it comes to political support for Ukraine.
Britain is very quick to provide assistance to Ukraine, especially since from the very beginning it had no illusions about the Russian Federation, because this is the country that used weapons of mass destruction on British soil. It killed a British citizen. That is, Novichok was used by Russian special services on British territory. And there are many, many other incidents that Britain understands perfectly well.
Let's also talk about the United States. In December 2025, President Trump signed a law allocating $400 million in military aid to Ukraine. In addition, at the beginning of January 2026, the US and Ukraine agreed on a system of politically and legally binding security guarantees to ensure lasting peace. These agreements include support for the armed forces of Ukraine and monitoring of the ceasefire regime.
The United States, or rather the current administration in power, clearly wants to use the suspension or the ultimate end of this ongoing war to its own strategic advantage. They aim to gain certain significant benefits, both electorally within their own borders and on the broader global stage. This is a calculated move to show the world that Donald Trump can successfully stop even such a serious and devastating war as this one.
It is important that, regarding the peace agreement between Moscow and Kyiv, which is being brokered by the US, the European allies are negotiating with America to ensure that peace for Ukraine is fair. Ordinary Americans also support the Ukrainians. According to a study by the Reagan Institute, more than 60% of Americans believe that Ukraine should win the war against Russia. Additionally, 64% of respondents support providing American weapons to Ukraine, a figure that has increased by 9 percentage points compared to 2024. And importantly, this support is bipartisan. This sentiment is currently shared by 59% of Republicans and approximately 75% of all Democrats.
Urgent, in 72 hours, the US and Europe will enter the war. Ukraine's partners are preparing a lightning strike. American and European troops will be in Kyiv within a matter of hours. Security guarantees are turning into real combat actions. All the shocking details are in the report.
a warning within 24 hours, and a military strike within 72 hours involving NATO troops. The security guarantees for official Kyiv, which have been discussed since last year by delegations from the US, Europe, and Ukraine, have become known. According to information from the Financial Times, Kyiv and its partners in Europe and the US have agreed on a multi-level plan designed to ensure Russia's compliance with a future agreement. This concerns a ceasefire in the war with Ukraine.
The first response to Russia violating the ceasefire will come within 24 hours. It will include diplomatic warnings and actions by the Ukrainian army necessary to stop the violation, according to 3 sources cited by the Financial Times. If hostilities continue, a second phase of intervention will be launched involving coalition forces of willing countries, in
particular to support the armed forces of Ukraine. On the third day, the United States, several EU members, as well as the United Kingdom, Norway, Iceland, and Turkey are ready.
The United Kingdom and France have promised to send troops and weapons to Ukraine as part of security guarantees supported by the United States, which are supposed to reinforce a 20-point peace plan aimed at ending the war, according to the publication. The Europe-led deterrence forces will be responsible for conducting operations in the air, at sea, and on land after the ceasefire, with intelligence and logistical support from the United States.
Meanwhile, analysts note that the details of the agreement remain unclear, since it implies actions by the Allies after a ceasefire in Ukraine, while the terms of a possible truce have yet to be agreed upon. Security guarantees have also not yet been signed, which also gives some countries the opportunity to withdraw from future commitments.
In any case, this deployment will be based on our own army. The second part is EU membership as a component of security guarantees and the backstop forces that will be provided by the United States. But this will become clear later, when certain documents are signed and approved by the US Congress. What will this look like? Ultimately, it depends on what the Europeans are willing to agree to. If Russia attacks us again, and what the United States will do in that case.
At the same time, the NATO Secretary General, who arrived in Kyiv on February 3rd and experienced firsthand what a massive shelling of the Ukrainian capital is like, assured the following. The alliance countries that supported the plan will not abandon it.
Ukraine needs security guarantees and commitments that we will come to its aid when necessary. And for this, the coalition of the willing provides for a backstop system of guarantees from the United States and the provision of military assistance to the armed forces of Ukraine.
At the same time, experts are already asking, how exactly can NATO armies help us if time and again statements are made in Europe that the alliance will only be ready for war in the 2030s?
What kind of military response is this, you might ask, considering that Europe, as we've discussed many times, simply no longer has the forces needed to operate on the ground in sufficient numbers? This is mainly a story about aviation because where Russia has a significant advantage is precisely in the skies. And in fact, if the European armies had intervened for Ukraine in terms of air power, for example, at the start of the full-scale invasion, if they had closed the skies over Ukraine so that Russian planes simply couldn't fly there at all, then the situation would have developed very differently. At
the same time, the leak of Ukrainian guarantees to the British press on the eve of the talks, which many believe was not accidental, plays a crucial role for the negotiations in the Ukraine-USA-Russia format, which will continue today so that Putin's team understands in advance. It is pointless to demand that support for post-war Ukraine be abandoned.
In the context of, for example, the negotiations currently underway, of course, this not only can but must become one of the elements of the system of security guarantees that will be offered to Ukraine. This is a very important point. This absolutely must be included.
It must be explicitly stated, and it can apply both to NATO as a whole and to individual countries. Moreover, we already have more than 24 agreements. Security agreements with various countries, and these agreements guarantee us certain types of support: consultative, financial, military, technical, and others, which without a doubt is the very foundation of the country's future security.
As is increasingly being noted in Europe, this is also the foundation of their own security. Against the backdrop of unidentified drones flying overhead, the open transfer of Orsha units to Belarus with an eye on the EU, and the restoration of Russian military bases on the NATO border, Ukraine is ceasing to be a buffer zone and is becoming almost the main guarantor of Europe's security.
Now, Europe and Ukraine are already forming an inseparable and indivisible system of European security, as it is called in the European capitals themselves. It has become clear that Ukraine is not a buffer. Ukraine is part of the common European safe space. After all, Europe thought it was stronger and that Ukraine was just a buffer. But it turned out that's not the case. Without Ukraine, Europe is much weaker, and with Ukraine, on the contrary, it can become stronger.
At the same time, we are likely to find out very soon exactly how the Russian leadership will react to the emerging information regarding the specific Ukrainian security guarantees. As soon as Vladimir Putin is informed that Dmitriev and his close associates have completely failed today in their efforts to persuade the West to back down, we can expect a significant shift in the Kremlin's public stance, forcing Moscow to reconsider its next moves in light of this diplomatic setback.